pristine wilderness areas on Vancouver Island are becoming alarmingly rare. If the present rate of logging and road building is allowed to carry on, all remaining wilderness areas outside of parks will be compromised before the year 1997. The east coast of Vancouver Island has been so severely cut that no substantial areas of old-growth valley bottom forests still exist. The only exception is that of the lower Tsitika Valley. In 1972, the fight began to have the entire valley set aside for its value as being the only intact watershed on the entire east coast of Vancouver Island. As non-timber values have not been recognized, the Ctica fell under the axe.
I was raised in a logger's paradise, where every tree had its price. Timber was heard ringing through the land. Logging truck driver blew his horn like a one-man band. Wages were made and the price was paid, everything down to the chainsaw blade. Clear-cut trees, a lot of stumps in the breeze, don't fall down. The last stand, the trees. The ravens look down, dark with disdain. Sweet smell of sawdust in the west coast rain. Timber was heard ringing like an axe. A whistle punk blew to haul the main line back. It's time to break for the lunch you take. You're a watching the whiskey jacks grow bolder as they wait. Clear-cut trees, a lot of stumps in the breeze, don't fall down. The last stand, the trees. Clear-cut trees, a lot of stumps in the breeze, don't fall down. The last stand, the trees. Fraser and Green, mighty tree-fallen men, best in the land of big wood way back when. Timber was heard in every lumberjack song. Hey, what we gonna do when the timber's gone, gone, gone? Walk the path of the aftermath and look at trees in the old photographs. Clear-cut trees, a lot of stumps in the breeze, don't fall down. The last stand, the trees. Clear-cut trees, a lot of stumps in the breeze, don't fall down. The last stand, the trees. Clear-cut trees, don't fall down. The last stand, the trees.
Problem is with the Ctica watershed, and it's been a controversial issue for 20 years almost. At one time, it was, of course, the last unlogged watershed on the east coast of the island, so people wanted to preserve the whole watershed. In the mid-70s, that was changed, and it was decided to go ahead and log the watershed. Originally, of course, we were trying to keep the log dump out of Robson Bight from down near the estuary, which I think is a good thing, regardless of what has happened or wouldn't have happened. I think it's important that these estuaries should be left alone. I don't think there's too much argument there now. For about 4 or 5 years, a group of people, a group I was involved with, worked with the companies and the government trying to show them what was happening there. We got research information from researchers. We got video or footage, movie footage of the whales doing what they do there, and managed to convince at that time Stephen Rogers to have a task force to look at it with government people. And from all that, it was recommended that the reserve, the Robson Bight Mike Big Ecological Reserve, be established as it is today. The Sierra Club, of course, had this very large, well, I shouldn't say very large, this 5,000 acre approximately park proposal to buffer the reserve. It was felt the reserve was too small. And that's basically what the conflict is today, is simply the loggers, the forest companies are saying they want to log all that bottom valley area because of the watershed, the wood that's in there. And certain peoples are saying that there should be a bigger buffer to the reserve. Down in the Bight itself, the roads are slated to come within about 170 meters of the beach in a couple of spots. I'm very concerned about access. I think access would be a big concern. It's pretty hard to keep people out. They'll make their ways down there. We get a lot of people wanting to walk from Telegraph Cove down there now, which is impossible terrain, and they want to walk from here. So if there's roads that get down there very close at all, that could be a problem. And I think very seriously the old growth part of the issue is something that we really have to look at. I'm afraid we don't know enough about our forests from the biological end of things.
Little knowledge exists as to the ecology of the Lower Ctica despite its high profile. In the spring of 1991, the Wilderness Committee established Wolverine Camp in the heart of the Lower Ctica. The camp acted as a base for Wilderness Committee and visiting researchers to instigate studies into this little understood ecosystem. Beaver, woodpeckers, marten, otter, wolf, owls, salamanders, deer, and bear are but a few of the many wildlife species that are at home in the Lower Ctica. As well, over 500 plant species have now been documented. This just scratches the surface in terms of biological inventories, but what is more important is just how the thousands of species, the geographic and climatic conditions mesh together to create this self-perpetuating ecosystem. Our knowledge of these associations is woefully lacking in light of the scheduled destruction of these few remaining natural areas. The Ctica is a genetic treasure that needs to be protected to guard against further loss of biodiversity. We must begin to learn from this natural library rather than look at it as a short-term dollar value on the timber market. Biodiversity intricately weaves together the very fabric of life. The little we do know in scientific terms clearly shows that the path we are on could be biologically devastating.
Coming down into this forest, I was really, I guess, taken aback by how gentle it is and how different it is to the Walbrand. Each forest seems to have its own personality. It's a very beautiful area. It's very gentle. I mean, even walking through here, you're walking on centuries of moss and humus. And it's like walking on almost on a mattress. It's very benign. Just being here is very peaceful. And it's also very saddening when you realize it could all be gone. And I think that myself and British Columbians and the world as a whole will be losing a treasure.
What I found the most interesting was actually the diversity that around every corner was almost its own little micro-habitat. In the whole month there was just surprise after surprise that you didn't count on, that the number of fungi, the number of lichens, things that you wouldn't have even thought were in this range. The area holds probably untold number of surprises for biologists. researchers in that it hasn't been studied enough to know what is the normal range here and what are the normal occurrences. The abnormal is almost what is normal here. Just the awesomeness of the amount of genetic material that's in this forest.
We would go at dawn and dusk on a daily basis and look for the murrelets flying up and down our valley. And we were trying to identify where some birds might be nesting. And we had an experienced climber come out to go up a couple of our trees trying to find a murrelet nest.
Marbled murrelets are seabirds which rely upon old-growth forests to provide nest sites. The murrelets use the moss-covered branches high in the canopy of these ancient forests to rear their young. In Canada, the marbled murrelet is on the threatened species list due to the disappearance of old-growth habitat used for nesting. Extensive research conducted from the Wolverine camp has indicated that the lower Ctica is crucial nesting habitat for this threatened seabird. Given that the lower Ctica is the only remaining unlogged forest of its kind on the entire east coast of Vancouver Island, this ancient forest could be one of the most important habitats to ensure the survival of this species. During heavy winds, lichens which grow in the old-growth forests fall to the ground in abundance. Roosevelt elk, a known old-growth dependent species, use these lichens for food. During heavy snowfall, when other food sources are buried by the snow, this can be especially important. Just how critical this is to elk in terms of forage intake or dietary importance is not yet understood. What is perhaps the most well-known attributes of the Ctica is where the river meets the ocean. Robson Bight, Michael Bigg Ecological Reserve, is the location where the highest concentration of killer whales known on Earth gather each year. One fascinating behavior displayed by the killer whales utilizing Robson Bight is the rubbing of their bodies on the smooth pebbles of the underwater beaches in the area. This behavior remains a mystery to researchers, as does why the whales have chosen this location. There is grave concern that logging and road construction in the lower Ctica will affect the estuary and the killer whales' use of Robson Bight. Increased sediment and logging debris could have devastating results on the rubbing beaches as well as on fish habitat. Logging roads pushing towards the estuary would no doubt increase unauthorized public presence in the ecological reserve. Research has shown that whales are greatly affected by human presence on the shores of the rubbing beaches. In 1972, the British Columbia Fish and Wildlife Branch proposed that the entire Ctica watershed should be made into an ecological reserve. The proposal stated, "This is the last untouched watershed on the east coast of Vancouver Island, and as such is an invaluable study area." In 1977, the BC government decided to open the Tsitika Valley to logging and appointed the Ctica Planning Committee to prepare a multiple-use logging plan for the watershed. In 1979, the Ctica Watershed Integrated Resource Plan was approved by the BC government, and MacMillan Bloeldel began building roads and logging in the upper Tsitika Valley. In 1980, the BC government established the Ctica Follow-Up Committee as a watchdog to monitor the adherence of logging to the Integrated Resource Plan. The United Fishermen and Allied Workers Union representative refused to participate and stated that the cutting plan is totally incompatible with the preservation of the Ctica as a wildlife, salmon, and recreational habitat, and we have no desire to preside over the desecration of the last major watershed area that fleetingly had some hope of retaining its natural state. In October of 1990, logging company MacMillan Bloeldel started the push to extend clearcuts into the lower Ctica. There, they were met by determined citizens who protested the attempt to log this remaining old-growth sanctuary. For years since a logging go-ahead was given for the upper Ctica, Catherine Creek has been the boundary marking the lower Ctica, where tens of thousands of British Columbians have maintained that no development should go beyond. To the forest industry, pushing roads and clearcuts past Catherine Creek and establishing a presence in this controversial area became an all-important tactic in trying to claim the lower Ctica for logging.
We feel we've done everything that we can in the way of raising public awareness, showing the need and the justification for setting this area aside. The public supports us. They've supported our newspapers, our slideshows. We're doing everything we can within our mandate of public education and generating public pressure to save this area. And MacMillan Bloeldel is ignoring it all and is moving in any way to cut down trees. Why won't MacMillan Bloeldel wait for public hearings, getting the full spectrum of public input to see whether or not this is in the best interest of the public?
Again, the area that's in question right now is the area past 101. That's the area that's been identified as the area that needs further study in connection
By
with...
who? The public has identified Catherine Creek as the line.
Okay.
And this is what we're talking about here, is anything past Catherine Creek is into the area that many people believe should not be logged. So we're letting you know that you are steamrolling over public concerns over this by not waiting for the public information sessions. You're also steamrolling over the concerns of the native people. So just for the record, we're at where the spur road into Block 101 forks off from the Ctica main line. This is the spur road going to Block 101. If you're looking down Ctica main line. What's that? There it goes. Christ. God. No old growth cedar bites the dust in the lower Ctica. Location of the sweat lodge that was built by Chief Russell Cox's Tower. It has also been discovered by MacMillan Bloeldel. There were posted signs around it saying, "Do not disturb study area."
Over 30 people were arrested in the attempt to keep MacMillan Bloeldel clear-cuts out of the lower Ctica. But in the end, the forestry giant was able to complete the falling of the hotly contested 27-hectare Block 101. What used to be a clear-cut-free wilderness area now has one scar marring the ancient forest. When areas are clear-cut, borders or edges are set up which have never had to take the full brunt of high winds. As a result, the forests bordering the clear-cuts begin to blow down. According to MacMillan Bloeldel, Block 101 was specifically designed to prevent blowdown using lessons learned from logging in the upper watershed, where clear-cuts now sprawl over 500 hectares in size. Just months after MacMillan Bloeldel clear-cut Block 101, blowdown began. As a result of building roads through a sensitive area near Block 101, an immense slide has continually washed sediment and debris into the valley bottom as well as the Ctica River itself. tons of rock have been trucked in an attempt to slow the impact road construction has had.
Where I first met you, you guys were following just on Block 101, and if you go across the road, we're at the end of that road, and you look down, I didn't need to be a scientist or an engineer to know that that part's going to crumble down, and that's the height of the basin.
The area
and
below
it'll
the
have a
road in
cumulative
Block
kind
101
of
is not
effect
going to be
on
logged.
soil erosion and stuff.
It's not going to be logged, the area below the road.
But above there, when you start getting the drainage from Block 101, it'll flow down.
Block 101 is not a soil-sensitive area. It's a very stable area. I fell there. It's mostly rock bluff. There's a lot of stability there.
And the mudslide, a massive mudslide, come on.
How many people here think that's a massive mudslide?
It's only beginning, that slide.
How was 100 foot from feet from it when it happened?
Be a model of
I feel it's a really good one. When you can be crushed.
This is a model. You guys are in trouble in the places that you're not trying to make it a good example.
How many people here are completely familiar with the logging operation? Are you? Familiar with this sort of situation?
You're going to claim
How
you're
come that happened? If you're so familiar with logging operations, why did that happen? That's environmental damage.
Let me ask you this, do things like that happen naturally?
Yes.
Yes, they do.
So did that mean it's okay to make it worse by logging areas that are already sloughing naturally?
I never said.
That area has natural little slope failures there, and you went and clear cut it. It's already a sensitive area that you have damaged by logging. There's no question about that. How can you deny that? Have you not damaged? Is that not environmental damage caused by logging? Bob, is that environmental damage caused by logging?
You tell me this.
Is that environmental damage caused by logging? Yes or no?
You tell me this. Can you tell me with absolute certainty that something like that wouldn't happen if you didn't work here?
No, not at all. But that's not the issue. As I'm pointing out, it's whether the logging causes environmental damage. That's the whole reason for studying areas, to see if they're sensitive first. Because an area that's already sensitive, if you log it and make that sensitivity even worse, then you're damaging the environment. And that's what people don't like.
In an attempt to nullify public concern over logging the Ctica, MacMillan Bloeldel refers to their operations in the Upper Ctica as model forestry, monitored by a committee known as the Ctica Follow-Up Committee. Ironically, this model forestry has resulted in extreme environmental degradation of the Upper Ctica in numerous ways. Clearcuts of over 500 hectares in size, equivalent to 850 football fields. Logging to the river's edge in fishery-sensitive zones. Completely eliminating creek and riverside riparian zones. Numerous slides washing into the river, which are aided and caused by road building and logging in unstable areas. Logging buffer zones around core swamp habitat, which has been identified as crucial Roosevelt elk cover. The small islands of elk ranges that are allowed for have not been preserved, but are only temporarily deferred from logging and will eventually be cut as well. These wildlife winter ranges were to be excluded from annual allowable cut calculations. But in 1990, Wilderness Committee research found that MacMillan Bloeldel had included these areas in their calculations. This totally contravenes and disregards the Ctica planning process. The Ctica is presently being over-harvested at a rate of 75 to 95% above the long-range sustained yield. This massive overcutting will invariably lead to lost forestry jobs. MacMillan Bloeldel defends the overharvesting by saying that one cannot look at one watershed in isolation of another. This kind of management approach puts the short-term dollar as priority over sustainable jobs and environmental integrity in the Ctica.
In the Upper Ctica, where this devastation has taken place, as it's so-called, the plan is still on target. There is still the required amount of deer winter ranges in effect. There's still the green up areas in effect, and we have not damaged the environment even by that large a clear cut. The plan has taken care of all that sort of thing. And as far as runoff is concerned, that's flat ground up there. We have not created siltation by it. And no, I disagree. Clear cutting has not ruined the environment. Everybody keeps telling us that the clear cut is what's damaging the economy or the ecology. Eh? And I would ask these people, you know, how is clear cutting damaging the economy or the ecology? And I don't believe it is. I don't believe there's any proof anywhere to say that clear cutting is damaging the environment out there.
Well, Derek Young, that's possibly a good time to bring you into the discussion. As the representative of the WCWC, what is wrong with clear cutting?
Well, I think it's starting to be recognized that clear cutting in the way it's done in British Columbia, from the studies that we've seen done down in the States and in Europe, indicate that one thing that we're not taking into consideration is the total biodiversity that's required to make a forest. And when we go to second growth plantations, as they are in Europe and as practiced here, what we miss is the total range of habitat for not just big game animals, but the total diversity of all species in the forest that are destroyed in a clear cut. And all you have to do is go to a clear cut anywhere in British Columbia, and typically what happens is a clear cut be anything from 20 to, as in the Ctica, 700 hectares, and it's simply a wasteland. And the methods that we use to clear cut is we take the trees down and then we slash burn after a year or two for a quick nitrogen fix. And the difficulty with that and the problem with that is that in a traditional, and some people liken that to a traditional forest fire situation. Well, it isn't, because in a forest fire situation, when there's a burn, most of the heat is in the crowns, and a lot of the trees will actually survive, and certainly most of the humus layer and the seed stalk and all the microrhizomes that are required to make up a total diverse forest stay in place. Whereas in our clear-cut methods and slash burn methods, we take the heat and we put it right down to the humus layer. We burn off just a vast quantity of the humus layer. We destroy all the microrhizomes, all the things that we are now beginning to discover are necessary for a healthy forest to survive, healthy relationship between the ground itself and trees. And we destroy animal habitat, insect habitat, we destroy all those species. And the way we've practiced clear cutting in this province is really devastating for biodiversity.
Bob, why is it so vital that loggers have access to the lower Ctica or any part of the Ctica? It's a very small portion of land, 40,000 hectares, in relation to the rest of the province. It's postage stamp size.
Because the Tsitika Valley it's a real misconception that we're there with a logging plan. We're there with an integrated resource use plan. And when you talk about integration of resources, you're talking about everything. You're talking about animals and fish and wildlife of all kinds, recreation, as well as industry. And when a fish goes into the river and he swims up the river, he's got to take the whole river. He just doesn't go up to a point where it says ecological reserve and stop. That fish is going to use that whole valley. And if you want to talk about wildlife, we can talk about wolves, we can talk about elk, you can talk about eagles and hawks and all those sort of things. These animals are transient. They don't sit in one spot, and they use the entire ecology. Cougars will use hundreds of square miles. So that if you want to take care of all the environment, then you're going to do the right thing by the wildlife. If you set aside a small area at the mouth of a valley like that, and then increase your cut with what's left, so you're winding up almost destroying 80% of your ecology to save 20%. And that's not the way to go. Integration is the story. And in order to integrate, you need to diversify. And if you can diversify your cut up and down the valley instead of creaming it all out at the top end, then you're going to make the plan work.
In 1914, in an attempt to work within the alien white bureaucracy, Chief Johnny Clark of the Tlowitsis asked the Royal Commission on Native Affairs to register the Ctica-Robson Bight area as Indian Reserve. Despite the recommendation for a reserve by the Indian Commissioner at the time, no reserve was granted. 3 months later, a 5,300-hectare pulp lease for the Tsitika Valley bottom forest was taken over by the Powell River Company, later to become part of the MacMillan Bloeldel Empire. The Tlowitsis Mumtagila take a strong public stand against proposed logging in the lower Ctica, maintaining that they have never given up their Aboriginal title to the area and vow to stop the brutalization of the Ctica by MacMillan Bloeldel.
We have watched the destruction, as you have heard. There is nothing but destruction. You are now seeing the last of the timber as we know it. And I think it's a crime and a sin for the Forest Service of British Columbia to continue to try to fool the public that this is a renewable resource. Greed is going to determine the fact that you're not going to wait much more than 100 years before you relog it. We're doing that already. So look at it. Look at the big trees that what little you see left, because that's the last time you're going to see big trees, unless you go to a park. And remember, when the Forest Service tells you that we're going to have forests forever, you're going to have forests forever, but you're not going to have a forest that's going to be representative of the old growth forest that we had here now, that is now disappearing.
Through default, I think the provincial government a long time ago gave away its authority and power and control of our forest over to the giant corporates like MacMillan Bloeldel. I'm not sure that those big companies still are good custodians or trustees of those resources that belong to all of us, including the native people in the North Vancouver Island area. We think there's a mad dash by all of the giant companies to harvest all of the primary timber. I've heard some of the colleagues here this evening saying there's nothing wrong with second growth forest, but you've got to know, and it's a basic principle, that every time you strip the integrity of the first layer, a second growth doesn't have that same integrity.
Bob, trees grow back, and I see them growing back, and in the Ctica plan, it's based on an 80-year rotation. Now, if it's done properly, you log a little bit here, you leave it, it grows, you go somewhere else, and on an 80-year rotation, we should be able to log there forever.
Some of you will, but 400 of you won't, because our studies show that if you log, or if we continue to log the Ctica at the rate that it's being logged now, and allowed for in the Ctica management plan, the Ctica follow-up plan, the TWRP, that, probably aptly named, that 400 loggers will not be working, because that is the rate that, that is going to exceed the sustainability of the cut.
MacMillan Bloeldel tells us their figures are right, and all you're doing is putting up an argument to M&B's figures.
How about the point I made about standard of living versus sustainability? Like, I really want an answer for that. Like, you're more driven, in, as far as I can see, my perception of the way things are going, you're more driven by the drive to maintain your standard of living as compared to some kind of sustained yield basis in the forest.
Well, I'm proud to be a logger. I'll tell you
well,
that.
So am I. I'm proud you are.
Okay?
I used to log too. I used to run the steel spar last time I worked in the forest.
And I'm proud of what I see happening in the Tsitika Valley. It's a model for the rest of BC. It's an integrated plan, and I see trees growing. I saw them planted when I first started there, and it's amazing how they grow. They grow too thick. They have to be thin, okay? And we log an area and we plant 25%. The 75% comes back naturally, and they come back so thick that they have to be weeded.
See, I started.
I feel good, Bob, when I go.
I started logging in the 50s too, eh? Like, and I logged on the coast when there were A-frames, and I saw those little operators getting forced out, eh? And I saw the clear cuts begin to visualize on mountainsides, and I saw Ctica Valley, where I'm from specifically, where we now get floods year after year that are getting more and more dangerous, and loggers and forest companies and provincial government reps are saying, but it's got nothing to do with clear cut.
Logging and road construction caused changes in stream flow, which is detrimental to fish habitat. Removing forest cover on small streams increases their temperature and alters the natural stream ecology significantly. Exposure of these soils accelerates erosion and transport of sediments into stream channels, causing major impacts upon the productivity of the ecosystem. Additional debris as a result of logging next to streams form log jams, which not only impede fish movement upstream, but when eventually broken up, cause debris torrents scouring the stream channels of all vegetation and potentially destroying spawning pools.
In the 50s, we used to fish 5 days a week. Now we're going to get 6 days for the whole season in the Johnson Strait because of the heightened concern for conservation of those stocks. So it's not all rosy. Like I don't think the forest industry takes all the blame for the decline of those, or decimation of those numbers, but they should.
So you're blaming logging for the decline on the fisheries.
But we have to. When you look at so-called streamside management, where streamside management consists usually of a buffer of maybe one tree width or three. If we were talking about a buffer strip that protected those riparian zones, which are alongside the streams and the rivers, which are the most highly productive sources of insects and larvae and so on that fish need to feed on, and protect the actual stream beds for the salmon stocks to breed in. If we were doing good streamside management practices, then we would probably still have a viable fishery. Problem is, we in this province have done virtually no research into our biodiversity or ecological systems. What research is being done is being sponsored only by the forest companies because they're the only ones with the money, and it's simply the baseline studies are not there to go back to and monitor over a period of time.
How do we account for the high volumes of wood that went down that creek during this high flood season?
I'd like to answer that.
Now, won't that have an impact, eh? And if we continue to log further down the Ctica, of course, that will increase the sensitivity.
All those trees that came down had roots on them. They were from cut banks where the river was so overflowing that it cut the bank away with standing trees. There was not a log at the mouth of that river that had a cut in it.
Naturally,
it was due to excessive rain and runoff with snow that caused the...
Yeah, well, that's my point. As we descend...
I mean, this was a 50-year, the worst floods in 50 years,
As we descend closer to the more sensitive basin itself, then that will become a problem.
It's unfortunate, but the public is being misled by a lot of statements by these anti-logging or preservationist groups. Certainly about the logging practices in the Tsitika Valley, about washouts, about the damage to the Ctica River, to the Robson Bight, to the ecological aspects of the valley, that it's going to destroy the killer whales. These are false statements that have been put out to the public.
Sue, is that true?
There are some real problems with the way that the logging is being handled in there, and I feel that if the Ctica management plan is the best that we can offer right now for the new forestry that is being offered within BC, that we are really in a lot of problems because it's not good enough yet. And that's what my concern is that the logging practices have to change. And the Ctica is important to us because it is being touted as the best logging in BC. And
Steve,
if that's
you had
the
a
best,
response to it?
I would just like to ask Susan to be more specific in what logging practices that you disagree with in the lower Ctica.
The large-scale clear cuts, 700 hectares. I mean, this is, I know that you say that was a mistake. It was blowdowns, but it happened within the Ctica follow-up, in the Ctica management plan. One of the specific things that's very obvious as you go down into the Ctica that looks nice is that you now plant seed on the road edges so that it looks nice and green. Now, that's nice, but that's not enough. That's not what we're changing.
It's not just for aesthetics, isn't it? It's to keep the banks from sloughing away. I'm sure you're aware of that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's an improvement. But if that's the type of improvement, that's not enough. That's what I'm saying. There are still large, large clear cuts, and the streams are full of silt, and there is a siltation study underway right now because basically we don't have enough information. And my position as a conservationist is let's wait until we're certain before we log. And I see logging happening faster and faster. Half of all of the logging that has happened within BC since logging started, whenever you would measure back to, I don't know if it's 1890 or when they started counting, has happened in the last 13 years. Now, we are logging faster and faster.
Susan, there's been logging in Johnson Strait for over 100 years. The killer whales have been coming there, I'm sure, a lot longer than that. If it was harming the killer whales, wouldn't it have done so in the past 100 years?
Half the logging,
and the logging
in BC has happened in the last 13 years.
The logging has improved in the last few years, where they're not dumping logs directly into the water anymore. They have dryland sorts. It's not as detrimental as it would have been in the past. The killer whales are still coming there.
They are still
bothered by the logging.
There are less.
Killer whales have been seen to be rubbing up against the booming grounds.
This report, the Johnson Strait Whale Report, and this report, Impact on Killer Whales, from David Briggs, says, this one especially says
there are less whales coming.
Now, we don't know why yet. Perhaps, that's what he says.
It doesn't specify Robson Bight, it specifies Johnson Strait.
He specifies Robson Bight, and this one specifically, this is only Robson Bight.
In May of 1990, a joint federal-provincial committee was struck with the Department of Fisheries and Oceans and the Ministry of Parks. The Johnson Strait Killer Whale Committee was mandated to assess the importance of Johnson Strait and Robson Bight to the killer whales and the impact of human activities on killer whales and their environment. Recommendations were to be made that would guarantee the continued presence of killer whales in Johnson Strait and at Robson Bight. In June of 1992, the long-awaited Johnson Strait Killer Whale Committee recommendations were released. Among them was a call for an immediate 5-year moratorium on all forest harvesting activities in the lower Ctica below Catherine Creek and the entire Schmidt Creek drainage. This was called for because of the concern over how logging could potentially increase sediment delivery to Robson Bight, as well as impact on fish habitat. The recommendations go a long way with proactive suggestions, but fall short in the areas recommended for moratorium. Catherine Creek is one of the largest tributaries of the Ctica River. To fall just short of including Catherine Creek and allow clear-cut logging to proceed in this major tributary could be a potentially devastating oversight. It is important to note that these recommendations were based solely on potential impacts on the killer whale's use of Robson Bight. Although the committee has recognized the association between the forest and Robson Bight, they were not mandated to comment on old growth values or the ecological importance of the lower Ctica. Any future decisions made about the Ctica cannot make the ecological values of this old growth oasis and the killer whale's use of Robson Bight mutually exclusive. We have not truly progressed until the lower Ctica ecosystem, which extends from its mountaintops to its shores and estuary, is fully protected from any further industrial development. We have the opportunity now to save a crucial segment of wilderness, which will also ensure that the killer whale's activities are not disrupted, and the pristine visual backdrop which gives Robson Bight whale watching its world-class status is not destroyed. Help keep the ancient forest wilderness and the mysterious whale rendezvous beaches safe for centuries to come.